You're listening to China Manufacturing Decoded from the Sofeast Group. Welcome back to China Manufacturing Decoded, the podcast from Sofeast. It's episode 224 today. Thanks for joining me, Renaud.
Hey, how are you? Hi, Adrian. Hi, everybody.
Good. And yourself?
Yeah, not bad. Been in Europe a little bit, preparing to get back to China. So, preparing for the heat and humidity of South China in end of June, early July.
Sure.
That's the best.
Sure, but you're going to be you'll be getting up to Dongguan, to Jillian, lots of stuff going on there. Super interesting.
Yes, but it's not everything is air conditioned there, you know.
That's true. That's
when
true.
you go in the warehouse or some production area, it's not air conditioned. So
that is true. That's true. But some parts it depends if environmental management is required. But yeah, I know what you mean. It is a little bit warm in the summer, but yeah, and plans afoot there. So if you go to LinkedIn, check out the Agilian technology page, you'll see the different things that are going on. We're expanding the plastic injection molding facility, which is one exciting thing.
And also the more prototyping equipment, some desktop milling and lathe machines, so the R&D guys can quickly get to work on a few pieces without doing lengthy sort of setup, you know. But it's still relatively accurate. It's not that at all, you know. But they have to sort of roll things by hand a bit to get it exactly to where they want, but it's much faster. Just for a few pieces, that's great. And also small SMT, you know, solder paste SMT and oven, PCB assembly, prototyping equipment. So some interesting stuff going on.
Yeah, I can't wait to go myself. Yeah, some interesting. So please do get some photos and videos and we'll get those shared out. Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So today, the topic actually, we're going to be talking about factory audits and specifically how to choose or select the factory audit that you need based on your requirements. And we've covered factory audits before, but I don't think we've exactly covered the guidance on selecting the right ones. And a while ago, we wrote a blog post on Sofeast and even created actually a video going through like this kind of flow chart. And so I thought it would be good to talk about that because I'm sure some of the listeners out there are thinking, okay, yeah, factory audits, that's important. I would like to be able to select the right ones, but which one should I select? I suppose the first port of call here, Renaud, though, is just to give it a quick introduction into what we're talking about when we do say factory audits.
Well, basically, it means an auditor goes to one production facility. If it's a very big one, usually it doesn't check everything, you know, all the processes, all the lines, all the stuff, but section of it. Basically, they have a checklist and they are trying to evaluate, okay, how far is the factory from, you know, being great, having very mature like systems and processes or whatever it is, you know, against that checklist, right? At a high level, that's what it is. So the topic can be about, do they have the proper quality system? Or do they do a good job with social compliance, you know, for example, right? Or like, do their R&D and NPI capabilities for, you know, and purchasing, et cetera, and process engineering and so on, for bringing a new product into production with low risk. You know, how good are they at that? Do they have a structured process, or is it very sort of unstructured? Let's just do it and see how it goes, you know, kind of process. And there's some other topics, you know, also environmental, right? Could be, hey, you know, how to say, are they structured with systems in place to minimize the impact they have on the environment and so on and so forth, you know. But again, is a big topic, right? Then every time you need to think, okay, how do we go about checking that specific topic? And it can be done very differently by different auditing companies. So it's all about, so what's the checklist about? What, how to say, how is it approaching, how is the auditor going to approach that big topic? For example, environmental audits. So there's more and more audits about, environmental management and so on. So it could be very practical and down to earth. Like, okay, emissions to the ground, to the air, to the soil, to the water. Okay. How is it? Is it quantified? What are the processes that pose a risk of emissions? And then do they have some kinds of abatement systems or something, to recuperate? Do they even maybe do a good job, maybe recycling some of it, maybe sort of recycling the wastewater and reusing it in their processes? Or maybe they have a lot of heat producing manufacturing processes. Maybe they reuse that heat somewhere else. Or maybe they produce some electricity with the waste heat that would just, dissipate, right? And so on and so forth. I mean, I'm not going to go through all the possible checkpoints, but that's a very down to earth approach versus a much more, not sure how to call that, ISO type of audit, where say, okay, well, environmental management, okay, there's a standard about how to set up a good management system for the environment. It's ISO 14001. And then you can really have a checklist that follows pretty closely, that standard. And then you can ask, okay, so do you have a list of the compliance requirements that apply to this facility with regards to the environment? Do you have a list of the impacts, the environmental aspects, of your facility? Like anything that might, that needs to be considered from an environmental point of view. And then what is the impact on the environment? How do you measure it, etc.? What are your objectives? And how do you ensure that you keep within your objectives? How do you train people, etc., etc.? So this is much more at the level of, paperwork and having, let's say, a couple of people in the office being able to answer the right questions and show evidence that they do the right thing. And yes, when we dispose of this, it's, I don't know, hazardous materials. Yeah, here's the license of the company that comes and pick up the hazardous material. We don't like throw it, at the back of the factory or something like that. Oh, okay, thank you very much. So it's much more document based. So this is really an example where you can audit for the same topic. Is this factory a relatively good steward of the environment in general? Do they pay attention to it? Do they do relatively good things, or like they do nothing at all? They don't care, or like worse, like they represent a significant risk of pollution to the environment, or excessive consumption of, water, electricity, etc. Like, do they pose a significant risk? And that, in a country like China, that can mean also, well, they could be shut down at any moment because they are not in compliance with local laws. The government is going after this kind of company. They could be closed down at any time. So this could be approached in very, very different ways, very sort of down to earth kind of approach versus, okay, let's be like an ISO 14001 auditor and let's see if they have the good management systems and they have the right records and procedures, etc. Right? And the latter, so like doing it like an ISO auditor is much more common because you can have the same auditors with a bit of training to audit to ISO 9001 for quality measurement systems, 14001 for environmental measurement systems, 45001 for, health and safety, and some others. And the auditors basically don't need to understand the industry. They don't need to have any technical understanding with it. It's kind of sad to say that, but that's sort of the reality versus actually going there and looking at it. Okay, is this place doing something good, or they don't care at all, or, they are very high risk, starting from the tangible evidence of looking at the manufacturing processes, the waste, all kinds of things. That's different. That requires someone coming from industry, right? So there's always this kind of tension of what kind of audit approach are we going to have, once the big topics such as environmental, quality, etc., has been picked, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, and you're talking about finding out specific different things about the factory or supplier, and the different audits have different purposes allowing you to get that information. So it's the gaining of the information that's the key point here, right? And so when we're looking at gaining we don't always use factory audits when we're sourcing a new supplier, but oftentimes it will be used in that scenario, right?
Oh, yeah. So I'm pretty sure most factory audits don't, when it comes to the selection of a new supplier, even though I'm not sure, because a lot of big companies have programs for re-auditing the current supplier, right? So I'm not really sure. But when it comes to small and medium-sized companies, for sure, most of the factory audits that they will do will be on potential new suppliers, right? So when, a project manager, whatever, a sourcing person or a purchasing person is looking for a new supplier, and then they say, okay, well, there's maybe this one or maybe this one, based on maybe an early indication of pricing and their capabilities and their experience and everything, and their, contact that we've had with them. We have sort of a short list. Now we need to actually start to check. So maybe very first might be, okay, if it's in China, for example, a quick look in Tianyuansha, or doing some background check, right? And there's some other things, right? That's what we call at Sofeast, we call it legal records check, right? Because you can look at the legal records, including capital invested, the authorized scope of the company, including not just trading versus manufacturing, but also what kind of product lines are they authorized to deal with? Have they registered any IP, like patents and trademarks, things like that? Have they been taken to court and lost the case? There's a lot of things that come up like this. So that's why it's mostly legal records, right? So, but, and obviously all the law firm will do a version of that because they all have access to the same information. And after that, it's all about commentary and analysis and, suggestions to the client. So that's like background check. So like quick background check, usually quick and inexpensive, simple. Okay. Any big red flag. Then after that, let's say you have 2 or 3 companies that you shortlist. Depends on your budget. Maybe you want to pick one and go a bit more in depth. So maybe you want to say, okay, we're going to do like a simple kind of audit on 3 of them. And then we have a much better idea. So after that, we'll be better able to pick the best choice. And then maybe we check them a bit deeper, right? So all of that makes sense. Depends on the context. So that's really usually, when a lot of factory audits are done. And the most common type of factory audit would be on the quality side, right? The big question is, okay, do they have the systems in place to actually do a good job, right? It's that simple, right? For a manufacturer, do a good job, assuming it's a product they already make or very similar to things they already make. It's all about, okay, do they pay attention to, their people and the setup of the lines and the daily management of the process controls and if they are relying on some production equipment, the maintenance and things like that, and the calibration and verification of the testing instruments, and do they pay attention to the suppliers they work with? That's very, very important. If they work with bad suppliers, they're not going to be making good products. There's no way. So how do they select and manage the suppliers? How do they check the materials when they arrive? And so on and so forth, right? So there's certain topics that always come back. And that's really, again, can they do, or are they likely to do a good job? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
If they need to develop a new product sort of from scratch, that's very new to them, or maybe not develop, but maybe industrialize, bring in production, the kind of product that's really new to them, then it's different. It's different. The approach is a bit different, right? There's some other things that come into play, and we can come back to that maybe.
Yes.
But the most common is, can they do a good job? And when it comes to, like let's say brand and retailer, when they select a new supplier, very often they will also ask, are they a significant risk to us in terms of, image? So that really leads to social compliance audits, right? And social compliance audits, well, an auditor will go to the factory and will, again, depend on different standards and different approaches. But usually they will look for things such as, is any child working here, underage worker, any kind of forced labor, which is a very wide topic. So when people work, what do they, is the factory like going to take their ID cards and keep it in their hands? Are they forced to work on certain hours or days when they actually don't want to work? There's all kinds of things like that. It's very wide. There's also the risk in certain countries of slave or semi-slave labor. And actually, this was not really a concern in China until the Americans started to hit on China for, a certain western province of China. Right? And they say, well, the Uyghurs are forced to work and the labor camps, and then they are sent to various factories as sort of slave labor and so on. And now a lot of American companies are very worried, not just Americans, of course, but Europeans also, because European companies also are, sort of have the same constraints now. So they're worried about this, but anyway, not an easy topic. And
No.
it's not likely that this would be done at scale in a factory that exports products to other countries. Like, if it's going to happen, and I have no idea, I have zero first-hand information about that. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen in tier 2, tier 3 sort of suppliers, right? Not tier 1 directly exporting, because they are audited by foreign companies much more often. Anyway, so forced labor, a very wide topic. Basic compliance with the law, and the days of recuperation and the overtime hours and the minimum wage and so on and so forth. And some other things such as personal protective equipment and the general sort of hazards in the workplace for the workers. And I think that's very positive. And sometimes this is blended a little bit with environmental topics, a little bit, right? Because if you really want to go into environmental topics, you do something on its own and you go in depth. But if you just want to go a little bit, then you just look at some evidence, anything that releases a lot of potential pollution to the soil, the air, the water, things like that, right? Anything that's very highly consuming, of electricity or water. These types of relatively simple questions, at least an auditor could pick up on some issues just by looking around. Okay. So the social audit, again, mostly for brands and retailers. And what that tells us is that this is mostly motivated by, hey, how can I cover my behind? Just in case something goes wrong and my brand is associated with that just because something is wrong in the factory that makes products for me. And it, it's become more and more popular, especially since some disasters in Bangladesh, where a big factory called the a big building full of factories called the Rana Plaza collapsed, where it was like 10 years ago, roughly. And then there's other factories, one called the Tazwing factory, I think, that burned, and then people found people then go there and say, oh, look at the garments, look at the labels, oh, this is a Walmart label, whatever label. And then Walmart really is like, hey, how do I make sure we avoid that in the future, right? So not just Walmart, but the importer that was arranging this production for Walmart. So yeah, that's social audit. Sorry, I'm running a bit long on that.
Well, I think we've covered sort of the what and the why of audits, at least as an introduction. So I think the meat of this is to talk about the different types of audits that the listener might encounter, right? And we did create a flow chart, which perhaps you might kind of follow the steps of that. But also, I mean, when it comes to what we offer, we have core audits that we offer at Sofeast, which are worth mentioning. So there's the initial factory evaluation, quality system audit, environmental system audit, and social compliance audit. You've kind of mentioned these already in terms of the types of things that people might be looking for when they are going down the road of getting audits done, right? And from those 4 particular audits, which I would say are probably core ones, that the clue is in the name: initial factory evaluation. So that's kind of due diligence. Quality system audit. Well, we're looking at the quality.
Yeah, not exactly due diligence, but I would say it's a relatively simple and inexpensive look at a factory.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes sense. For example, when, as I was mentioning, you have 3 potential suppliers, you need to pick one, and you want to have a relatively good snapshot of, what they're doing. Do they have some kind of system in place? I want to see some photos. I want to have an idea about, any big obvious holes in the quality system, right? So that's what we call the IFE, initial factory evaluation. And then the quality system audit is sort of the bigger brother. And this one goes to the factory and goes more in depth. Okay. It also tries to have an evaluation of the capacity of the factory, because if you're going to place relatively large orders, but the factory cannot make it, in less than 3 months, let's say, well, they're going to have to subcontract. And the whole idea about auditing the factory is becoming irrelevant, because it's going to be subcontracted probably to another factory that you never hear about anyway, right? So looking at the production capacity is important. And also, difference between the initial factory evaluation and the quality system audit is, as I mentioned, initial factory evaluation, a little bit less in depth, less pricey. Okay. Why? Because when a company is planning to maybe work with a relatively small factory, right? And I'm talking maybe 50 people, 100 people, maybe 200 people. In China, that's still considered small sometimes. But then the factory doesn't pretend to be ISO 9001 certified and to have a proper quality system and everything. They just say, well, we know how to make this product. That's the way we make it. And we really, we're going to pay attention to your order and everything. And you know what? If the order quantity is not going to be very high, that is quite attractive to the buyer in many cases, because the smaller factory will be less expensive. It will tend to be more flexible. Will tend to be more reactive when maybe you are one of their largest customers, so they're really focused on your need. I remember an example, a company was like, oh yeah, we placed the order for like, 45 days from now, but actually now our customer really needs it faster. Can you do something? And then they all work like crazy and through a holiday to deliver it 1 week earlier. And then the customer was so happy. Now, in terms of software compliance, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's great. Okay. But that client was elated. They were so happy, right? And they would not get that from a relatively large factory, right? Let's say, I don't know, 800 people factory where they're not the number one customer and maybe the number 10 or 20 customer. And that's it. And that's what you're going to have. And, oh yeah, we'll do our best. And that's it. No, they're not going to go out of their way. So all of that to say that we don't want people to be discouraged just because a factory doesn't score very high on their quality system. There's obviously some other criteria that need to be taken into account, right? How good of a match are you guys, between the buyer and the supplier? And that's really very important. That's the number one question, right? So what kind of supplier, should you work with? Okay, if it's not a very big supplier, then no need to go and try to audit a system that may not exist anyway, right? It's better to do it in a simple way, not scare them away with a lot of questions that you don't even understand. And you have an idea about the truth about what it is. And then it's up to the, whatever the clients, purchasers, product manager, or whatever, to make an informed decision based on, the motivation of the supplier and how good of a fit they are to each other and so on and so forth, right? And pricing and lead time and all of that. So that's sort of the difference between an initial factory evaluation and a quality system audit.
Okay.
And yeah, we've had this distinction for many years, and it kind of always made sense. There's always cases where one is a better fit than the other.
Okay. So if we talk about how to select the right kind, okay, so that's introduced some of the core audits that we would normally provide, right? But if we look at the situation where you are going to potentially send somebody to the factory, what happens if the factory do not allow somebody to come in? Which I guess during COVID this was more common, but it still might be an issue.
Not so much. It is sometimes an issue when the factory believes that they have some kind of secret sauce in their manufacturing processes and they don't want us to see it, or to make a video of it or a photo of it or something. So sometimes we can go, but we are requested not to take any photo or video. Okay, if the client agrees with that, okay. Or sometimes some little bit of negotiation, maybe, don't take photos in the production area. The rest of it is okay. Okay, all right. Easier. Or don't take any photo that might show a product. Okay, that's fair. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So, but then sometimes it's like, no, sorry, you cannot come. But again, this was very common during COVID, when sometimes they would be scared of receiving visitors, or sometimes even within China to go from one province to another, it was really a pain. And then you never knew. And then the people arrived in the province and then they would check in the hotel and then they would be told, oh, your QR code just turned whatever, orange or red, you have to stay here for 7 days before you can get out of the hotel. And it's like, oh no, come on. Right. Not to mention if you had to send someone to, I don't know, to Cambodia or some place from outside the country. A lot of countries were just closed for a while. So in that case, it's whatever you call it, remote audit or e-audit, right? Where you can get them to give you a quick tour through the camera of their phone, and then you mostly look at documents. It's not great. You get an idea, but it would be easy for them to sort of mislead you, right, about what they really do. So not great. We really don't advise that. And then the main question is, okay, you can go there. So what do you want to look at? What
Yeah.
are the main risks, right? So quality is going to be mostly, can they do a good job? Again, social compliance and environmental, any big risks for maybe the buyer's reputation or, are they really doing some bad stuff? Yeah, some companies really care about that. Not many, but some. And then if you need them to work on a new kind of product, relatively different from anything they've done before, then you start to look at their systems and processes for the development and industrialization of a new product, right? And you look at certain aspects of the quality system, yes, but you also look at, okay, do they have requisites, maybe R&D capabilities, experience, or do they have the right validations? Do they have some validations and milestones, or they're just going to try to run all the way to mass production as fast as possible? Like, oh, we have a prototype. Now let us go into mass production. And then they're just going to want to buy the component, make the tooling, buy the components, release them on the shop floor, pack things together and push them out to you, which is the scariest thing. Because for sure there's going to be all kinds of issues, right? And okay, I could keep talking about that, but really, when you develop a new product, there's also more than that. You don't just select a supplier. Okay, they have the right systems, etc. You still need to accompany them through the process. You, as the buyer, there's still a lot that falls onto you, right? And if you say, okay, we delegate everything, you do the design for manufacturing, you make the tooling, you prepare the checklists, you do this, you do that. As the buyer, you should still look at what they're doing. You should still approve these checklists. You should approve these tooling samples. You should approve the adjustments they're doing for better, for easier manufacturing and assembly. You should look at their risk analysis, and you should actually require that they do a risk analysis. Otherwise, you get to go there on site and do it with them, or work with a company like ours, do a FMEA on the processes, right? And get them to maybe have a control plan or so, right? So, and then when they go into a pilot run, because you want to force them to do a pilot run, at least one, then you want to check their manufacturing readiness, and you really want to be there or to have someone there to look at what are the big issues. Because sometimes they might be very slow because there's one operation that is holding everything back, very inconsistent and whatever. Anyway, maybe it's a testing station, by the way. Maybe it's an assembly operation. Whatever it is, something is making it very, very slow. But since they only make 50 or 100 pieces, they are already done within 2 or 3 days anyway. But then they go into mass production, and then, it totally blows out all of your shipment estimates, right? Or there are quality issues. And maybe tell you, oh, it's okay, just a few issues, we're just fixing them, it's okay. Let's go ahead in mass production. But maybe their first pass yield is only 20% or 0%, right? First pass yield means what is the proportion of the product that have gone through the entire process without needing to be reworked and that are declared good at the end, right? Very often it's below 50% in the first pilot run, right? So what is it? Do you feel confident that their first pass yield is going to jump from whatever, maybe 20% to 98% as soon as the first mass production run? Of course not, right? It's going to take some time. Maybe you should not allow them to go into mass production yet. Maybe they should plan for a few more pilot runs. So doing just factory audits is not sufficient, basically, right? That's the main message.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, that makes sense. It's part of the toolkit. It's part of the toolkit, but it's important to introduce.
Yeah.
And I think when we are dealing with customers, like let's say a new customer comes to us and they're working with us as far back as sourcing suppliers, at least we will be suggesting different kinds of audits to them, but that won't be the only thing that we're suggesting.
Right. So, as I mentioned before, when you're planning to work with your supplier, you want to evaluate the risk. You should do a bit of due diligence, not just an on-site factory audit.
Yeah.
And in the simplest of cases, you're going to buy one of their existing products, low engineering content, low complexity. You have relatively low quality requirement. Well, there's not so much you need to do. Just make sure you're very clear about your requirements. You know how they're going to pack it, these types of things, and that's fine. At the other end of the spectrum, you come up with an innovative product, totally new from the factory. Maybe you're in a regulated industry. Maybe it's medical, aerospace, mining, whatever. You need to be a lot more involved, right? So it very much depends on the context.
Yep. Yeah. Very good. Okay. So that is quite the introduction to factory audits. And so that's quite a good coverage of factory audits. We've talked about what they are, why you need them, and some of the key kinds of audits that you might find helpful for the different reasons that could suit your needs. There is the blog post that I mentioned earlier. There's even a video in that blog post where you're going through them and explaining some stuff as well. It's going to be a bit different to this podcast episode. So plenty of information there and about the specific audits that we provide here at Sofeast too. But yeah, along with many of the other things that we discuss on the podcast, actually an important part of the toolkit, factory audits. So I'm glad that we've been able to cover those today successfully.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Great. Okay. So back next week as normal, and I dare say we'll have you on again soon, Renaud, as well.
All right. Yeah. Talk to you soon. Thanks.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share because it will really help others discover us too.